Good afternoon and welcome to yet another episode of the EQ Lunch and Learn. We provide the learning and you provide your own lunch. We're delighted to have you here with us today, and I know that we're going to have a fabulous conversation. I know we always do, but today's topic is one that is very dear to my heart as we explore how to build our capacity for mental well-being. Mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual can cope with everyday stresses, work productively, reach their potential, and contribute to their community at work and elsewhere. Mental health, along with physical health and social and emotional well-being, are an essential component of overall wealth. It's important to point out that mental health is more than the absence of mental illness. You can have poor mental health without having an illness. And likewise, you can have good mental health with a mental illness. Today, our topic is the right mentality. Mental wellness is the result of investing in mental health. It takes work to get to and sustain. Mental wellness is often misunderstood, as I've already said, as just the absence of mental illness. But it's more than that. It's a state in its own right, in which energy is put into mental well-being. Research shows that if individuals experience low mental well-being over a long period of time, they are more likely to develop a mental health problem, which has a devastating impact on the individual and on organizations. Over 200 million workdays are lost globally due to mental health conditions each year. This translates to 16.8 billion United States dollars in lost productivity every year. Today, we're going to explore what is mental health, what is mental well-being, why is this important, how can we develop mental well-being, and what are some of the contributors to the mental challenges we face at work. As always, I have a fabulous panel who are going to help me unpack these questions because I couldn't possibly do this on my own. So allow me to introduce each of my panelists in turn. First up, I have Alison Wainaina. Alison, it's really great to have you here. Alison has 9 years experience in human resource, learning and development from the NGO and financial sector. In her current role at FSD Africa, she is responsible for building out and delivering a suitable learning and development strategy for the network. The key goal of her role is to ensure that the FSD network staff are equipped with the skills and knowledge necessary to achieve the ambitious FSD 2.0 strategy. Alison, great to have you here today. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mucha. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. If you'd like to connect more with Alison, you can connect with her on LinkedIn. We've shared a link to her LinkedIn profile. I also have with me today Melissa Kiyoko. Melissa, it's great to have you here as well. Melissa is a young, passionate, and enthusiastic psychologist concerned with all matters mental health, awareness, and psychoeducation, with speciality and experience in dealing with trauma, general mental wellness, and mental illness management. She is also a creative and a fashion entrepreneur with a business that creates made in Kenya fashion pieces. Melissa, welcome to our session today. Melissa, welcome. Looks like we're having a slight challenge with Melissa. Hopefully we'll be able to sort that out. Yay, okay, I can hear you now. It looks like there's a bit of a lag, Melissa, with your network. I hope it's not going to disturb us from having a great conversation with you today. My last panelist, and he is the rose amongst the thorns, I guess, if we twist the statement a little. Daniel Macau. Daniel is a professional whose 15-year career spans various sectors in large multinationals in the FMCG and communication sectors and local startups in real estate and technology, with experience in various roles in human resource management, operations management, client relationship management, project management, and merger integration management. He is currently in the human capital space in the banking sector. Daniel is passionate about mental wellness and lives by the mantra, be good, do good. Daniel, it is great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Mucha. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Awesome, fantastic. So let us dive right into our conversation. Melissa, I feel as though there is some sort of a lag with your network. I'm not sure if you can hear me clearly, but hopefully we'll be able to get comments from you. As we continue, if you would like to connect with our panelists, we've shared the link to their LinkedIn profile. Alison, since I brought you on first, let me kick off with you. How would you define mental well-being? Do you think the terms mental health and mental well-being mean the same thing?
Thank you, Mucha. Happy to be here and happy to dive into the conversation straight away. You know, I struggled with the definitions and being able to differentiate the two actually for a very long time. And I took some time to really research upon it. And I would say that there is a difference between mental health and there is a difference between mental well-being. Mental health, they say, is a state of well-being. You know, WHO says it's a state of well-being in which individuals realize their abilities, can be able to cope with the normal stresses of life, the traffic, the normal, what we'll call the youth stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, can contribute to their community, and just generally are able to live a normal life in terms of health-wise mentally. Well, they say mental well-being, I would say, is also a sense of subjective well-being where you have the ability to have pleasures and happiness in life, that you're able to live a meaningful life and strive towards one's full potential, be able to find meaning, complete your goals, sort of have a feeling that you're contributing to society, being challenged, and just having a very deep rooted sense of purpose and grounding and belonging, as well as social connections within society. So I would say that they're very different because one is your general well-being, your subjective well-being, and it's very individualistic as well in terms of how you feel your well-being is. And then mental health is really generalized as being able to have a normal coping mechanism of life. That's how I would differentiate the two.
Fantastic, thank you. Daniel, let me come to you and get your insights on the same question. Is there, do you see a difference between the two terms that we often use interchangeably?
Thank you, Mucha. So they're not necessarily the same, but they do feed into each other. So mental health is really made up of our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and choose. Whereas well-being is simply it's feeling good about yourself and your life. It's about you being able to give your best, to be your best, and to have a high life satisfaction and a sense of meaning. I'd like to ask the question, not just how are you, but are you well? When you ask someone, are you well? It's a sort of a deeper question there. And someone has to really reflect and figure, am I well or not? And well is not just physical, it's mental, it's the whole thing. And Mucha, you mentioned earlier, if you experience low mental well-being over a long period of time, you're likely to develop a mental health problem. So they are related, they're not the same, but they are strongly related.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Melissa, I'm not sure if you're able to share your reflections on the same question. On my end, it still looks like your screen is frozen. But Melissa, if you're able to unmute yourself, would you like to share your reflections? I think it would be great to get your insights as our resident psychologist. All right, it looks like Melissa is still having challenges with the technology. You know, you have to love this technology that can enable us to have conversations across continents, but can also be a bit of a disaster at times. So we'll come back to Melissa as soon as she's able to speak with us. Alison, let me come back to you. You know, as we navigated the pandemic, we were really forced to have conversations around mental health. And organizations really grappled with supporting the mental well being and mental health of their teams. What lessons do you feel we learned from COVID about how organizations' policies must support their teams?
Thanks, Mucha. It's a very good question because one of the things that did come out, the positive things that did come out of the pandemic is precisely that organizations started realizing that we do need organizational policies around mental health and interchangeably mental well-being. Why so? Because organizations began to realize that there's a benefit of ensuring that organizational policies will increase productivity for the company and contribute to a sense of well-being to the staff and the community at large. So if you're able to have a policy that speaks into mental health, what are you doing innately? You're creating a community that is of sound mind, is healthy, and can be able to increase productivity within the organization. And I think one of the things that caused organizations to do this is because they had to start having very hard conversation around what is mental health. We started having hard conversations in terms of what level of awareness do we need to have about mental health? How do we define mental health? How do we define mental well-being? Then thereafter, once we're able to create that level of awareness, we're able to break the stigma that has been there for a very long time because we're having those awareness conversations, which in turn created a sense of understanding within the organization. And it said, all right, within these policies, what can we then thereafter do to provide psychosocial support to be able to support those who are in need of mental health support, and how can they be able to achieve this? So with this psychosocial supports, then and enabling, it ensured that organizations started thinking alongside with these policies, can we be able to create medical programs for people to be able to get the help that they need? Are we able to create support groups within the organization that people can reach out to one another and share? Are we able to provide a 24-hour support for those who are in need of mental health support during and after the pandemic? So we started thinking, how can we incorporate this within organizational policies? And in turn, we can ensure that there's a level of productivity within the organization and accountability within the staff as well, because then you're aware of what somebody who could be struggling with mental health will display in terms of symptoms and indicators. So holistically, there's an element of accountability, and all of that was gravitated towards an organizational policy. Because as you said in the beginning, thousands of dollars are lost, or a lot of turnaround time is a cause in most organizations because of mental health conditions. So it forced us to have a very hard conversations around this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alison. I think we can say that what COVID did is it forced us to have those tough conversations, and we can say that the days of not talking about mental health are gone, or at least they should be, because positive mental health is important. It allows us to cope with challenges, even good ones, and to navigate the setbacks that we face in our lives and at work. Daniel, I want to just, linger a little longer around this idea that COVID changed the way we look at mental health at work. Why is this support that Alison talked about important? Why should mental health be a mainstream conversation? What is the cost to organizations when they don't provide employees with the support that they need.
Thank you, Mucha. So first and foremost, it's important to recognize that the employees that we have in our institutions are human beings and not just human doings. We seem to be more, more concerned about what people can do as opposed to who they are and how they are. Okay, so we're human beings. How so wellness and how we are being. To set the base, I'll give this example. When we are hiring for roles, we look at a couple of things. We're looking at your technical and leadership ability. We're looking at your attitude and your cultural fit, and many other things, right? But all of these are greatly diluted if the individual in question has low mental wellness or is having a mental wellness issue. So the mental state of any employee is as important as their skills and abilities. And why should this conversation be mainstream is a question I think you've asked. And back to what Alison mentioned, indeed, one of the positive outcomes of COVID is that it forced us to start having these conversations. But even with increased advocacy to open conversations about mental health, it is still considered like a taboo. Okay, so there's mental health stigma, and this stigma prevents a lot of people from seeking and obtaining life-saving treatment. So forums such as these, and a big thank you to Mucha and to PTS Africa, these forums help us to demystify mental health and help people recognize their own symptoms, and hopefully they then go ahead and get help. If you're on Instagram, you'll see posts Monday through to Sunday of people, talking about leg day, Monday burpees, Tuesday push-ups, or whatever it is. And so we're very big on our physical, on the physical side, physical wellness, but you see very few people talking about the mental side. Yet the correlation between the two is really deep. It's hardly the case that you'll be mentally not in a good space and be physically well. It's very rare that that you'll not be affected by your mental state physically. So I remember, I can give an example. I remember last year I was diagnosed with burnout, and I had all these symptoms that I thought was COVID, wasn't COVID. I thought maybe it's a serious infection, wasn't. Many tests later, my doctor confirms actually there's nothing wrong with you. You're probably just stressed out and you need to take a break. So my mental state wasn't great, and it had begun to impact me physically. There's a conversation we must have and continue to have. Again, literally, they save lives, these conversations. So why must it become a mainstream conversation in one word or one sentence? Because it saves lives. In fact, I'll put a challenge to everyone who's listening in. Have a conversation with a friend this week, before the week is over, about their mental health, how they're doing, and also share yours. Share yours with them. So my little challenge to everybody that's tuned in today. There's a question also about, yeah?
I like that. Sorry, Daniel. I really like that challenge, and I think that we should amplify that across our social pages. That we're all challenging each other to reach out to just one person and check in with them on their mental health, and talk about ourselves. And I think be willing to be vulnerable about where we are as well. Yeah. So sorry to interrupt, but I really like that challenge, Daniel.
No, it's fine. That's fine. I mean, that's how the conversation becomes mainstream, is when we have the conversations with each other, and then it grows, and that's how we make it mainstream. There was a question about, what is the cost to organizations who don't provide employees the support they need? When I was researching, I came across some statistics from the WHO. They say that depression and anxiety have a significant economic impact. The estimated cost of global economy was $1 trillion per year, lost in lost productivity. And I mean, that is on the sort of the macro scale. Poor mental health and well-being at work can cost organizations a significant amount of time lost, money, and resources. And it's very simple. Employees who feel unhappy or unsupported cannot work to their full potential, and because there's a gap between what they need and what they're actually getting. They say that mental health issues are actually going to surpass all other work-related illnesses, such as musculoskeletal, I don't know if I said it right, disorders. I remember in my days in the real estate side, there was something called carpal tunnel syndrome. So, people typing all day, or, your posture and whatnot, respiratory diseases in factories and so on, cancers, hearing damage. all of those combined are soon going to be passed by mental health issues. So again, there's a huge cost there. Disengaged employees, demotivated employees, unhappy employees are more likely to display signs of not just absenteeism but also presenteeism. I show up to work because it's important that I show up to work, but I'm doing nothing. My mind is just not there. And what that then eventually becomes is low levels of productivity, and the result is anybody's guess. So I go back to that definition of wellness. If I'm feeling good about my life and my work, if I feel I'm able to give my best, then the organization I work for gets the highest productivity from me.
Yeah.
So I hope that somehow answers a bit about it.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that, Daniel. And I can see Alison was really nodding as you were sharing that indeed there is an impact, and we want to extend this challenge that Daniel has shared with us all. Before the weekends, we challenge you to reach out to a friend and have a conversation about mental health. And I think a key part of that is our willingness to be vulnerable and talk about what we are going through as well, rather than putting up this, what do they call it, the stiff upper lip, pretending as though all is well and we are fine, and yet we are struggling. We've been doing a mental well-being challenge on the PTS Facebook group, and this is the conversation we've been having about how can you ensure that on a daily basis you are looking after yourself. So thank you very much for that, Daniel. We still seem to be struggling with Melissa, but we're going to continue with the conversation. Alison, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that question around, the cost, especially as someone who is also in the people space, the cost to not doing anything, not having those conversations. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, maybe just to reiterate really what Daniel had already mentioned, is a lot of people don't know that they're struggling with their mental health because it culminates as psychosomatic symptoms that people may not be aware of for a year plus. So you suddenly find you've been very well, but then suddenly you're currently going to hospital, you're struggling to get out of bed. Typical signs of early onset depression tend to happen. So I think one of the key things that I would say within organizations, because of the cost of it, you'll start noticing that suddenly our medical revenue payments per year have increased. It's not just social illnesses or just normal illnesses. It's an attribution to mental health. So what I would say is to add on to that is to ensure that we are creating sensitization sessions like we're doing right now to be able to demonstrate and show, look, we take care of our physical health. We know how to take care of it. We know if you want to go on the keto diet, stop eating carbs, increase your fat intake, do your running, do your walking. We increased all of that during the COVID pandemic time. But do we know how to take care of our mental health?
Fantastic.
Do we
Thank you very
know
much.
how to take care of it?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really key point you make there, Alison, that oftentimes we don't realize. And sometimes the beginning stages of our mental health challenges can manifest themselves in physical ways. And earlier Daniel talked about the idea that the mental and the physical, and I would add the emotional, are all actually very much intertwined. And so you find that there's this persistent headache that you have. And actually, there's nothing physically wrong, but it could be because of a result of extended stress that is now causing you to have that headache. So, you're so right that we should have these conversations around, what are some of the things that we should look out for. A big shout out to Irimo. Thank you very much for joining us. A shout out to Anne, who's also here with us. If you've joined us, say hello on the comment section from whatever platform you are on, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, or our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, do share them. We will come to a section where we focus on the questions you have, but you don't have to wait till then. Feel free to share any questions that you may have, and we will answer them as we go along. I'd like us to spend some time talking from an organizational perspective. And then, because it's important for us to do so, I'd like us to also then spend some time talking from an individual perspective, right? So that we can look at both angles. So if we start with the organizational perspective, let me just let me just ask Daniel. I want us to get a bit specific. What can organizations start doing to better support their team's mental health?
Right, thank you, Mucha. I think at the onset, the major thing is to be proactive, not reactive. So a lot of the policies that perhaps existed in organizations before the pandemic were just because of pressure. Employees saying, there's this thing, there's a crusader somewhere in the organization who's talking about mental health, and so the organization just throws something together and you have it there. But one thing that COVID has taught us is that there's a lot more uncertainty than there is certainty, going forward. And because of all these different transitions, we are more likely to see employees struggle with anxiety, depression, burnout, trauma, PTSD, whatever it might be. Okay, and so the big thing is for organizations then to proactively figure out what must we do to support our employees. Most employees would not be comfortable telling their line managers that they're struggling, they're stressed out at work, and those that even go and get help, the statistics say less than half of them actually say something about it at work. So organizations really need to send a clear signal to their staff that the mental health matters. They must be open about it, and they must be willing to lead, support, and let staff know that they will be supported, not discriminated. A simple way to explain this is to explain that mental health will be treated in the same way as physical health. So three things come to mind, and Alison had mentioned one earlier: policy. Every organization has to outline at the policy level, this is how our stand on mental wellness, and this is our commitment, therefore, to support right from the highest levels of the organization, whether it's board members or senior leadership or whatever it is. There's a commitment right from the top that we recognize the place of mental health, mental wellness, and we are going to support our staff who may need it. And then you have a framework, which is the second thing to support that. So at NCBA, for example, we've got an employee assistance program that allows staff to have confidential conversations with the service provider about their mental well-being. It's open 12 hours a day. 12 hours a day, yeah, 6 days a week. And it's basically a tele-counseling service, and it's manned by qualified professionals. And it's anonymous. You can call at whatever time. So this is part of the framework that we've built here to support our employees. Third thing is budget. And again, Alison had touched a bit on this. The costs of supporting this are not it's considerable. But you, as an organization, you must put your money where your mouth is. It's a true sign of commitment to then assign a budget. At NCBA, for example, we've ensured that our medical cover covers mental wellness as the same way it would cover any physical ailment. We have got an approved list of service providers. It's got counselors, therapists, psychologists, and so on that list. And if you want to see a particular specialist that's not on the list, then you have an option to see them and claim back from the organization. So the idea there is to let people know that it's we're supporting our staff through these often hard to navigate moments. It's tough enough for any one of us to admit to needing help. And as such, when organizations facilitate an environment where it's easy to get help, then employees feel valued and are more likely to actually receive that help. Again, the typical barriers is just confidentiality and cost. I think is the big thing that happens in an employee's mind. Can I afford to do this? Can I even talk about it? And so if you create an environment where it's possible for an employee to seek help and to actually get it, then you're on the right path. So what can an organization start doing? Three things: policy, framework, and budget, is what I'd say. And just create that environment where, it's not taboo.
Yeah.
I hope I've answered the question.
Yeah, no, you have. And I think the last point you talked about is so crucial, that there needs to be money put after it, right? It's not enough to say,
Yes.
this is something that's important to us, but there needs to be, to support the framework, money that is actually committed by the organization and a budget set up that supports some of the initiatives. I like what you've talked about, the initiative of a confidential space where you can call and you can get support, and it's something separate from your work, and so you at least you deal with the fears that individuals tend to have around, oh, if I mention, what is the repercussions possibly of mentioning. So thank you very much for sharing all of that. A lot of people have said hi from the different spaces they are. Pauline says hi from NCBA. Barry is on YouTube. Jacqueline, great to have you here. Esther, Barry, Edward, Tabitha, Amani, Roberts, Lizzie James, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. Remember, share your questions. If you have any questions, I have the right panel with me. Melissa, I trust that we can finally hear your voice as you say hi to us and share with us your insights. Melissa, maybe I can ask you, work is good for mental health because it's good to be able to apply ourselves in positive ways. But a negative work environment can lead to mental health problems. What are some of the major work-related risk factors? Remember, we're talking about things from a organization perspective before we come to talking about it from an individual perspective. Melissa, your thoughts, and welcome. Melissa, can you hear me? Oh man, I thought that we were, I thought that we finally had Melissa with us. Melissa, are you able to hear me? All right, it looks like we're still having challenges with Melissa. That is such a shame. Yes, Melissa, I can hear you. Are you able to comment? All right, so we continue the conversation between the three of us. It's a shame that we're not able to get Melissa's insights, but hopefully she'll be able to join us at some point. So, Daniel, you talked a bit about, what some of the things that organizations should start doing. Alison, could we talk a bit about what organizations should stop doing? So what are some of the things that we do in our organizations that actually impact negatively on our people's mental well-being?
Thanks, Mucha. What I would say in terms of what organizations should stop doing, Daniel mentioned some of them, and I had also listed a few. Just to reiterate them: stigmatization of mental health, that somebody will feel discriminated in the eventuality that they need, for example, to take unpaid leave because they need to really rest and recover from their mental health condition. Treating mental health just like not any other condition, where, for example, you're going through cancer treatment, it's the same thing. You may need to go through 2 months of total rest, healing, and rehabilitation, just like any other condition. And then also, I would point out not recognizing and addressing that the content and context of work can also play a role in the development of mental health problems in the workplace. As we had said earlier in the beginning, continuous lack of mental well-being and putting yourself in the same situation continuously can develop or lead to development of mental health conditions. Your depression, your bipolar, your clinical depression, clinical anxiety. So what I would say is organizations not keeping in mind the factors that can bring employees this level of mental health problems in situations such as role ambiguity or constant conflict within an organization, not recognizing that, and especially for us in the HR space where there's certain continuous conflict in a particular relationship can attribute to mental health problems with in a long duration of time, poor working conditions, poor leadership and communication. Role ambiguity is also something else that really can cause elements of mental health problems in the long term. Not properly being remuneration and recognized can also cause some of these factors on a long term. So what we should start doing from a HR space as well is ensuring that the work environment we are creating for our employees is one that harnesses and increases the ability for people to work in an environment that is amicable, enjoyable, that doesn't lead to mental health problems, and just recognizing that we have a part to play.
Yeah, I like that. And the last point you made, this idea of the importance of the environment, cultivating the right environment to ensure that people can thrive. And one of the things that Daniel spoke about earlier is the rise of not just absenteeism, but presenteeism, where someone comes to work because they have to, but really and truly they've checked out as a result of the challenges they are facing. And so the environment itself can contribute to having heightened levels of, being out of balance. Um, I'm just thinking, as you've said what you've said, Alison, then it means that the leaders that we have can then really contribute towards someone's mental well-being or otherwise. And so, if I follow that train of thought, it then means that organizations need to really invest in developing leaders who are aware of the impact of their behavior. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
And
would
so,
agree.
sorry, carry on, Alison.
I would agree with that because it also comes to the level of leadership. Are you a leader that brings out the best in your people? Are you a leader that is more centered in terms of deliverables and attaining of targets? But as Daniel had said, do you see the human capital as the true value of leadership within the organization? So I do believe that leaders do contribute. Yes.
Yeah, they do. I want to sample a few comments here I can see from the audience. Daniel, there's a question here for you. So, Daniel, maybe you could share the burnout symptoms you had and how you recovered.
Okay, so for me, the burnout just it presented as if I had a serious like infection. Couldn't sleep well, struggling to concentrate, struggling to contribute. Generally, those were the symptoms. But leading up to it is probably, when you have these conversations, it sounds cool when we say, I had insomnia again. You know, it's supposed to be cool. It's not cool, actually. In terms of your mental well-being, sleep is such a key thing. So a couple of things is, not being able to sleep well, not eating right. You have this packed out day, so you skip lunch and then you have dinner or brunch, dinner, lunch, something maybe six in the evening. And then when your body is supposed to be winding down, now it's trying to digest the food. I mean, like, so it's a whole bunch of things. But what I did is I took time off to rest. It was a week of just doing nothing. And then I then went on to my own personal mental wellness journey with a therapist and so on. Just help me unpack, what are the things I'm doing that are contributing to my state, and how can I then get, navigate out of it. I don't want to give a blanket, this is what you must do, because I think everyone has an individual set of, unique things impacting them. But I will suggest strongly that if you think, but the person who's asked the question, if you really think that you might be having burnout, you probably do. I would suggest that you have a chat with your GP and see a therapist. Try it the one time if you're happy with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that advice you're giving. I think that we need to normalize therapy. We need to normalize getting help the same way that if I had a persistent physical challenge, so whether it's a persistent headache or if my eyes woke up and they were a little swollen, I would go and see a doctor. I would ask for help and I would follow the treatment plan that the doctor gives. I think it's the same thing that we should do as far as our mental well-being is concerned. We should normalize getting help, and that means just reaching out to someone who is a specialist, who is then able to provide the treatment that we need. I have another question here that I'd like us to get to, and I think this is something that many of us struggle with. Barry is asking, is lack of enough sleep part of mental strain? Say if I sleep at 9 p.m. and by 1 a.m. I am awake, fully functional without the sleep deprivation feeling. All right. So any thoughts on that question, comment from Barry?
Um, Barry, get that sleep. Do whatever you can to get that sleep, because what happens is our bodies are incredible. We will. It's easy, very easy to train the body to do something crazy. Um, and it's going to be really hard for Barry to then unlearn waking up at 1 a.m., maybe 4 hours of sleep every day. Um, a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep, if you're able to get that every day, you actually get more out of your day. I know, and perhaps it's an issue of how we went to school in this part of the world. We were in school until late in the evening, and then put your feet in a bucket of cold water to stay up and read for another 6 hours because you must pass this exam and all that. And it really is just not. As long term, there's significant issues that will come with it. Your body has to rest. Otherwise, one day it'll just force you to rest.
Yeah,
I don't know
I
if
agree with
you
that. Yeah, Alison, I don't know if you wanted to add to that at all.
Yeah, I think I will. Sleep is the most important thing for us because this is where our body cells regenerate. And it's interesting. I like what Daniel has said. We think insomnia is a very cool thing to say, I didn't sleep last night. It really is not, because then your mind is just not rejuvenated. And after some time, you will start noticing the psychosomatic symptoms we're talking about, just getting unwell, really feeling tired, not being able to concentrate, to focus on things. So you have to be very intentful about forcing yourself to sleep.
Yeah,
um, you know, and our phones and all our gadgets and whatnot are also a big contributor to us not sleeping. The blue light is the most notorious one because they say it's like receiving sunlight during the day, at night. So you really need to tap off for 1 hour before you sleep and force your
yeah.
mind to really turn off and get proper sleep.
Yeah. I think for me, that's one insight, the one you just shared, that really has transformed my sleeping patterns. Or at least I try, is winding down. This idea of winding down before actually going to sleep. Barry, as I was reflecting on your question, I attended a sleep seminar of a friend of mine who's very big in sleep, and she did a session for us around sleep. And one of the things she said that really blew my mind is that there are some serious potential health risks to not having consistent sleep. So as Daniel said, it's typically said that adults need about at least 7 hours of sleep a night. If you can stretch it to 9, even better. But when you have chronic sleep deprivation, it actually can lead to high blood pressure, diabetes, heart attack, and heart failure. And so what happens is you can have an individual who has consistently gone without enough sleep. As Daniel says, you've kind of reconditioned or taught yourself or told yourself that you can cope with just 3 hours of sleep. But what happens is when the body shuts down as a result, it just shuts down. And it can lead to things like, heart attack and heart failure. So it's really important to make sure that we get enough sleep. So we've talked quite a bit about what organizations should do, what organizations should stop doing. I'd like us to come to, thinking of things from the perspective of the individual. So, Alison, depression is one of the leading causes of disability globally, and it has a significant economic impact. How can leaders be on the lookout for signs that members of their teams are struggling? And how can I, as an individual, pick up on some of the signs that I'm starting down a slippery slope? And then for leaders, how can they provide the necessary support? So, my question is around, firstly, as leaders, how can they see the signs? Daniel talked earlier about us being proactive in organizations and what can they do? And then also for me as an individual, how can I start picking up the cues that I'm going down a slippery slope so I can arrest that transition?
Okay. Thank you, Mucha. I'll start off with the leaders, and it pretty much summarizes what we have already spoken about in terms of the things that they can begin to recognize. One of the key thing is they'll start noticing in terms of productivity and performance management that there is a slippery slope happening in terms of work output. You'll start noticing across the organization that we are suddenly getting very high levels of low productivity. Especially, I'd like to use maybe Daniel, who he's in the banking industry. So, culmination of numbers suddenly across different departments can indicate low productivity, and things are not going very well in an area that is quite quantitative to measure. Behavior, you'll start noticing as a leader behavioral changes within the organization. There's a sense of anxiety among staff. There's suddenly a lot of conflict within the organization from the HR point of view. There's a lot of conflict within departments. There's a lot of reduced staff morale across the organization, staff motivation. Then they'll also start noticing, as we have started mentioning, staff illness. Suddenly there's a high correlation of staff illnesses, increased output in terms of medical revenues being paid, in terms of high turnover, that's something else that's coming up, and paid leave. They'll start noticing there's a difference in terms of the behavioral component of their staff within the organization over a period of time. That's how leaders can start noticing this, and then putting in the parameters that we have been mentioning in terms of the policies and the procedures, the framework, embedding the psychosocial support in terms of the policies and the procedures, putting in the budget, as Daniel had mentioned, as well, providing employee assistance programs, and then ensuring that people are getting the right amount of rest that they need, especially for those who have particular ailments with mental health. Then, in terms of an individual, I would say that there are certain signs that you will notice. We have mentioned one of them, the biggest being sleep. Insomnia is one of them. So you'll start noticing in terms of sleep cycles, insomnia, and then there are also those who opposite of that sleep very much when they're depressed as well. So it's just having low energy levels, sleeping all through the day, as well as restless sleep, awakening in your sleep, with the startling sort of responses in the middle of the night. Those are some of the first things that you can start noticing. Then, of course, your behavior as an individual, you start getting really irritable because you're not sleeping as well. You'll start noticing that you're erratic in terms of your mood. You just generally feel hopeless, guilty, loss of interest in things that you used to care about, not wanting to participate in activities that were, things you enjoyed, such as going for a walk, running. You don't have the energy for some of those things. So those are some of your mood and behavioral changes that you'll start noticing. And then your whole body, excessive hunger. Some people also tend to eat quite a bit when they're in that state of depression because it's comfort food. You're eating to numb the pain and to try look for instant gratification and pleasure. So you'll eat quite a bit. Substance abuse is something else that you'll start noticing. Hey, I'm suddenly liking the bottle quite a bit, or whatever tickles your fancy in terms of substance abuse. And then you'll also notice those who have a total loss of appetite and say, I had a friend who was going through depression and they hadn't eaten for 4 days and hadn't noticed they hadn't eaten for 4 days. So you'll start noticing things like that as well. And then, of course, cognitive, you're pretty much slow in activity. Worst case scenario, they usually diagnose you with depression when you have constant thoughts of suicide. Is one of the signs that you're reaching a point of clinical depression as well. So these are some of the things as an individual that you should and start being aware of in terms of a continuum of it's just beginning, burnout, fatigue, of that, and then on the other end, you're starting to notice, hey, I can't
Yeah,
concentrate, I have no
yeah,
hope, and I really want to leave this earth.
yeah.
Then I would say you need to quickly get help.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. Something that I can't remember if it was you or Daniel said earlier. is around the importance of sensitization. Sometimes we are going through and we are, on that spectrum, because mental health is a spectrum, and we are on that spectrum, and edging towards, being challenged, and we don't recognize it. But if we have such conversations where, you realize, wait a minute, actually, yeah, that does sound like me, you're describing me, then it helps us to navigate. Melissa, we really have been struggling having you here. I'm not sure if you're able to say something so I can see if we can hear you. I'd love to hear your thoughts around some of the challenges we face at work in relation to harassment and bullying. Melissa, are you able to comment? Okay, Melissa, still having challenges with you. Daniel, let me come to you. Talking about us as individuals, and we're sharing, some of the common challenges we face as far as work is concerned. So having an anxiety disorder can have a really major impact at work. People can turn down promotions or other opportunities because it involves travel, or maybe it involves public speaking. Some people make excuses to get out of functions in the office, and events with co-workers. And sometimes it can mean, inability to meet deadlines. What advice would you give to an individual who's struggling with heightened and debilitating levels of anxiety? So, the standard levels of anxiety are, we all struggle with those, but we're now talking about where it's actually impacting someone's ability to do their work.
Yeah, thank you, Mucha, for that. And again, you've just highlighted what I was going to start off by saying, is that anxiety is a fact of life for everyone. What varies is just how it affects people's behaviors. That's what varies from person to person. So we all have anxiety, and I'd like to give the example. Typically, if I'm flying, even if it's for like holiday, the night before I get onto an aircraft, and this is like, it's going to be a nice, good thing. You're going on holiday. I don't sleep very well. Okay. So there's an excitement, but there's an anxiety type side of it. Before this session, maybe 2 hours before this session, I was like, whew, same feeling, right? But very different scenarios, but the feeling is the same. And so in terms of advice I would give, the first one would be to just recognize the symptoms for what they are. Okay. You get this feeling, spend some time understanding why. In fact, even before all of this, I would suggest strongly that you have professional help to walk you through the journey. So the suggestions I give are really just, can I say, plain vanilla type suggestions, but walk the journey with a counselor or a therapist. Learn to recognize the symptoms for what they are. Anxiety loses some of its hold when the sufferers put it in perspective. So I feel like this, but there's no actual threats. So putting it, just recognizing I might feel this, but there's no actual issue. Or maybe there is, but me feeling the way I'm feeling is not going to change the fact. Okay. When you recognize the symptoms, there's a way it just kind of sucks the power out of them. The other thing I'd say is acknowledge it for what it is. If it's resisted or denied, it seems to have a better hold on you. And acknowledging is not the same as giving into it. Anyone who suffers from anxiety, if you're able to then look at how you react and say, if I react like that, that's one option. I could react like this, that's another option. So when you present it to yourself as an optional way to respond or react to the anxiety, then you're taking control over your actions and your reactions. Okay, so that's the second one. The third one, and this is to the procrastinators in the building: act before you think or overthink. Just do it. Too often, the anxiety. People living with anxiety will talk themselves out of a good opportunity, and we're not saying that you should be reckless, but a lot of the time your first instinct is probably right. So don't overthink it. Just do it. Fourth, I would say embrace a healthy lifestyle. This is something I'm learning a bit more recently, how to balance everything, from diet, exercise, meditation, in whichever form it is, having moments where you sort of just unplug from if you work typically in a building, have some time out in nature, out in the sun if you can. All these things tend to improve your state of mind, and will help you get through moments of anxiety. And finally, I'd say ask for help. But ask for help and also accept the help when it comes. There are lots of good professionals out there, especially in this market, who are helping lots of people cope and understand themselves and change their relationship with anxiety. I would then, I would say, it's little successes add up to the big changes. So bit by bit, it's not going to happen overnight. If you're out there and you're like, man, I don't know what to do with this anxiety thing, it's not going to be an overnight thing. But when you get onto the journey, step by step, you will see improvement. I'm able to recognize situations that I know will be stressful, so I prepare beforehand. But I know I'm going to meet such and such a person, and I know this is typically how the conversation might go. So I prepare, beforehand, and sort of brace myself so that in the interaction, I'm then able to give my best and to receive the best that I can. So I hope I've answered the question somehow.
Yeah, no, you have, you have. Thank you very much for sharing. I mean, I like I like the insights you've shared, and especially this idea that um, we call it name it to tame it. So in EQ speak,
Yes.
there's this idea name it to tame it. And research shows, so this is evidence based, that when we are able to speak or articulate what we are feeling, we actually reduce the power that it has over us. And as you were sharing, I was thinking to myself that, in as far as emotional intelligence is concerned, one of the tools we have for navigating overwhelming emotions is a three-step process that's built around the 6 seconds emotional intelligence model that we use, to support individuals. And that's know yourself, choose yourself, give yourself. So know yourself is about self-awareness, and that's exactly what you mentioned, Daniel, that we need to get comfortable with who we are, warts and all. So whatever our challenges are, we need to be able to actually recognize that this is what it is. And it's not a weakness, it's something that we can learn to navigate. And then the second is choose yourself. So what options do I have? And you talked about the fact that I can respond this way, or perhaps I can respond this way. And what I've learned about the power of the brain is that when we tell ourselves that no options exist, the brain stops seeing options. But when we tell ourselves options exist, the brain starts looking for what those options are. And so, a great way to free ourselves from being caught up by the emotions that can easily overwhelm us is by just asking that question: what options do I have? And then the last part of the model is give yourself, which is about your why. And we know from our research that when my purpose and why is clear, it helps to fuel my behavior. So, this is really important. But again, underscoring everything, as I think we've all said, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not be okay. And if you feel that some of these strategies aren't helping, or perhaps you've tried all those things and they're not working, then it's okay to ask for help, to get help from a professional who can support you. A friend of mine, Elsie, always says that we must normalize therapy and asking for help. I have a question. I have a question I wanted to ask you, Alison, but before I come to that, I have a question here from Carol. Carol Miner says, how can you assist someone who is struggling with ill mental health and not willing to seek professional help? Alison, maybe I can come to you first, and Daniel, if you then have something you want to add. How do you help someone who isn't willing to ask for help?
Musha, that's a very difficult question because it's one of those situations that the person needs to be able to be willing to receive the help, because a lot of the work comes internally from working with a therapist. But what I usually do say is sometimes what you can do is just be with the person. Be with the person as much as possible, because there's support that comes by being in somebody's presence. As much as they're not able to share what they're going through, but the fact that they're not innately alone does support, number one. Ensure that they're getting some element of health healthy food into their bodies, drinking water, just the basic health that they're eating. That's the most that you can do. And then with time, at the right time, I usually do believe that you can be able to take somebody to a therapist, and the therapist will know how to deal with somebody who is not willing to get the help, because again, silence, and then one word, two words, three words, four eventually becomes a conversation.
Yeah, I like that. I think one of the biggest gifts we can give people sometimes is just being silent and being there for them. I think the challenge with mental health challenges is that in many individuals, they manifest behavior that causes people to want to pull away from them. And yet, that's the very time when they need people the most. So I think, what I would add to your response, Alison, is just really supporting what you've said, that be there, right? Don't don't leave, even if they tell you they don't want you to be there. Daniel, do you have any thoughts that you could add to that?
Not much else to add, really. I like what Alison said. I mean, it's creating an environment of just love and care for this person. Don't make them feel ashamed that they have, I mean, if I had a broken leg and I'm refused to go to the hospital, you're not going to come and tell me, you should be ashamed of yourself, man. It's you you have to be gentle, I guess. You have to just extend love and care to them in their language, in the way that they understand. I found it also useful if there's someone in the circle that has gone through therapy, has gone through something similar, bringing them into the conversation and letting them then share their story helps someone see, okay, maybe I can get help. The issue with our society, though, is it's so stigmatized that seeking help is not normalized when it should be. So, yeah, I think those would be my comments on how to help this individual.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. I almost feel as though this the mental health awareness month should be like a ongoing thing, right? It shouldn't just be a month in the month of May, because a lot of these conversations are happening, and then that will be it. So we need to continue having these conversations so that we can support both the individual who's going through what they're going through, but also supporting the friends, because oftentimes our reaction to what someone's going through exacerbates the situation, but it's unknowingly. So you don't realize, like you say, Daniel, perhaps you think by shaming someone, you will snap them out of their stupor. And yet it turns out that it was the worst thing you could possibly do. And I think that there are times where we think we're helping with the comments that we make, and yet those comments aren't helpful at all. And so sometimes just being silent and sitting in silence can help. Tabitha has a question here. What should one do when they realize that they have bitterness with almost every person who surrounds them? I think this is a tough one. I'm not sure who wants to handle this one. So, what to do when you realize that you're just bitter? You're bitter with everyone around. So it's not just certain people. What's the way forward here? Anyone want to take it?
Yeah, I think I could have a go at it. I think it's to honestly be able to have a very honest conversation with yourself. And sometimes that's not one of the easiest things that human nature can ever do, to have a very honest conversation with themselves and sit with themselves. And sometimes it's very difficult to sit with yourself, because sometimes we end up creating a loop in our minds that's a constant thought loop, repeatedly over and over and over again. But sometimes when you sit with yourself, you can be able to identify one or two areas that could be the cause, or could be the indicator of what is causing the bitterness. Then I would say you move it on to the next level, which would be finding a trusted person that you can be able to share what this internal struggle is that you're going through. And sometimes it may be difficult because then you will feel a level of judgment with a trusted person. So we always go back to therapist, because a therapist will give you a situation or an environment that you can be able to share with no element of judgment, and can be able to ask you very self-reflective questions that can innately and inwardly support you to be able to find out what is this loop of bitterness and what is causing that loop of bitterness, and why is it culminating in your life in this particular way. Then you can begin your journey in terms of healing from it. But it starts with you asking yourself some very important questions and seeking help to be able to understand why and heal from it, and be able to live a healthy, productive life thereafter.
Yeah, I like that, this idea of having a meeting with yourself. I think that all too often we're not honest with ourselves about, who we really are at our core and what we have done to contribute. I always say that in the event that one individual or two individuals, have a certain perspective about you, that's one or two individuals. But when it becomes the norm, where everyone, or it's an everyone kind of thing, then that's when we need to look at ourselves and see how we're contributing to the situation. Barry is bringing us back to the conversation we were having earlier about supporting people who are going through challenges as far as their mental health is concerned. And Barry says, okay, but is there a limit to being available to a person undergoing ill mental health? Because we're human, and at some point we might crack, give them real, or as well get pulled into, the where they are. So, Daniel, what are your thoughts? Is there a limit? How do I make sure I'm available, but at the same time I'm protecting myself as well?
I think the one word there is just boundaries. Um, and boundaries sound harsh, but they protect both of you. So boundaries is what I'll say, but boundaries with empathy. Um, and I've found that typically people in that situation will have one person that they really feel this is the only person who can help me. Um, it's now your job to say, okay, but also so and so can also help, and so can also help. And if you've got a good circle of friends, take turns to spend time with this person, because the one thing you don't want to do is then move into a place of resentment when you are really just trying to help somebody out. Because then what happens with resentment is now you cut them off completely, and they're still struggling, and they're probably, they were irritating you because they do have a mental health issue, but they need help at the same time. So it's a really tricky balance, Barry, but it requires wisdom, and it does require boundaries. I think that would be my response.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that, Daniel. I think you're right that we must learn to make sure that we put in place boundaries. And I like what you said about tag teaming. So if you have a good group of friends, you then take turns to make sure that you are all participating towards supporting this individual. We still have quite a few questions that have come through. If you still have your questions, we are answering questions right now. So please do go ahead and ask the questions you have. There's a question here from Wambui. How can organizations handle outgoing employees' mental health where there's an abrupt change? For example, COVID-associated attrition, where proper change management processes can't effectively be carried out. This is a great question. Alison, would you like to tackle this one? So how do we handle people who are exiting? How do we support them as far as their mental health is concerned?
Thanks, Mucha, and thanks, Wabwe, for that question. It's a very good question, because one of the key things that I've been privileged to work with two organizations that actually support in terms of a transition plan for people who have been affected by attrition by COVID, for example. And we know that quite a bit went through attrition during COVID. And I think it's imperative, because with that transition plan, you're helping them with tools, procedures, guidance in terms of how to live thereafter. Before even we get to mental health, it could be from financial budgeting. You're going to receive, possibly if you're getting a little package of redundancy, you'll get the financial. So you need to be able to handle that, what to do with it. How do you be able to penetrate into the job market thereafter? What are the tools and procedures or templates or, your CV and whatnot that can guide you there? But then most importantly is the mental health aspect, because unfortunately, we affiliate our self-worth with the jobs that we do. And that's one of the most difficult things that a person can go through is attrition, because you need to be able to separate the work that you do with the person that you are. Those are two different people. So going through support in terms of, be it even a few sessions of counseling, I know they do offer, or being able to go through an element of coaching also does support, because then you're able to iron out and pick out the things that you need to do to holistically move from this transitional period. So I do believe that organizations should prepare a transition package program for those who are exiting, to ensure that the individual is left being able to stand on their own feet, but also most importantly, be able to know that they will be able to function well from a mental point of view and in different facets of life as they move on through.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. I engaged Melissa, and it's such a shame that we're not able to have her online. She says that she's having a power outage, and it looks like her mobile network is also giving her challenges. But what I asked her was around harassment and bullying at work. So what I'd like to do is just share with you the response that Melissa gave, and then, Alison and Daniel, if you'd like to add to that, you can. So my question to her was, harassment and bullying at work are commonly reported problems, and they can have a substantial adverse impact on mental health. What advice would you give to someone who is listening to this today, someone who will listen to this later, who's really struggling to deal with either or both from a colleague or a supervisor? And so this is what Melissa says. Melissa says, if you are being harassed or bullied at work, it's important that you know there are things you can do about it, and there are people who can help. You have the right to work in a safe workspace, free from violence and bullying. For one, make sure you're informed. Check to see if your workplace has a harassment policy and a complaints procedure. Keep a diary. And I think this for me is so important. I'd like to underline this point and highlight it. Document everything that it happens, and document it factually, including what you've done to try stopping the harassment. It's also important to speak up about what's happening and get support from someone you trust, or contact support services. I think it's also important for organizations, Melissa goes on to say, to implement and enforce health and safety policies and practices, which can go a long way in identifying distress and providing resources to manage such situations. So I think the advice we're getting here from Melissa is, don't suffer in silence. Speak up, be aware of what is available within your organization so that you can get the support that you need. Daniel, would you like to add anything to that, to the comment that Melissa has shared?
No, I think it's pretty well covered there. In our organization, we've got a whistleblower policy. So if we see something, and could be, from fraud to harassment to whatever it is, you've got an anonymous way of letting the right people know. And so again, just a challenge to every organization out there. This is something you must have, just to make sure that everyone is safe and well taken care of. Yeah.
And I guess this goes back to the earlier point you made, Daniel, about the three things that organizations must have, right? They must, and some of that is that framework that allows for someone to share. There's a comment here from, there's a few comments here. These are not questions, they're comments. I'd like to share them. In light of all this info and awareness of mental health, shouldn't wellness programs be entrenched in active organizational policies as we seek employee-centered solutions? Sally, 100%. And I think, Daniel and Alison spoke about this idea that as organizations, we must be proactive and being proactive is making sure there's some sort of program that is available internally. We've done some work as PTS Africa with organizations. We have a program we call Organizational Vitality. And the Organizational Vitality Program is a series of modules around emotional and mental well-being. So we've partnered with specialists, with psychologists and medical doctors to run this program to just really support individuals in organizations to understand, why or how they can take care of themselves. And one of the facilitators, coincidentally, is my sister-in-law. She's a medical doctor who's focused on well-being. And one of the concepts that she introduced me to is this idea called responsibility, being responsible. And being responsible is about being responsible for yourself, taking care of yourself, understanding that you cannot give from an empty cup. And so we do a lot of work with organizations supporting their teams to identify what are some of the strategies they can put into place that will help them to maintain balance. So Sally, I agree with you 100%. Jacqueline says that leaders need to be vulnerable and share their struggle journeys as well for employees to share their mental health issues. This creates transparency and trust. Again, I think this is spot on, Jacqueline. And I can see why Rimu is agreeing with Jacqueline, why Rimu says, Jacqueline, I completely agree with you. It makes employees feel safe at the workplace, safe enough to be mentally unwell from time to time without guilt. So thank you very much for those comments. I hope I haven't left out anyone's comment. One last question before we come to your parting shots. And this is a question I would have loved Melissa to answer, but I'm sure we'll try and tackle it. Can people get over mental illness without medication? Can people stabilize a mental illness simply with medication alone? So there's a question around, dealing with a mental illness once it's diagnosed. Alison, would you like to comment on that question?
Yeah, I think I could have a go at it. I think from a general point of view, it depends on what mental illness, what condition you have, because there are some that do require you to take some level of medication and those that don't. If we look at, for example, bipolar is an illness that creates a chemical imbalance in the brain that you will need to take medication for you to be able to function with your day-to-day life, day-to-day living. So it depends on the condition. If we look at, for example, depression, remember as we talked about depression, can be from a different continent. It can be it could be depression where it's active. Well, Melissa would have said it better, but I would say it's depression that it's in the beginning form, but then there's a point where depression becomes clinical depression, and by the time you're getting to see a therapist, you're clinically depressed, so they'll need to give you some medication for a very short period of time, and only because it's affected the chemical balance within your brain, so that they can be able to work with you and go through the psychotherapy of what we'll call the therapy sessions. So we can say that it depends on what mental illness you have, but then at the same time, you can be on medication, get out of medication as part of the treatment program of the mental illness. And then, of course, again, there are those that don't require any medication and just require you to go for therapy for you to be able to work through some of the concerns that you have that can reduce the anxiety and whatnot. So I think it's a bit of a general thought, but then at least it answers a bit of it from a very high level point of view.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think you're right. Daniel, did you want to contribute to that as well?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, so one of the things that is is very bad about how we us Kenyans and probably Africans generally, we want to treat ourselves. We go to the clinic or rather to the pharmacist and say, I think I need augmentin, and if you could just throw on some Panadol, the stronger one, not that one, the other one, and so. And it trickles down even to mental health. We will choose what we think will sort sort out the problem. I'm feeling lethargic. I'm going to have 3 espressos, but you don't know why you're feeling lethargic in the first place, and you don't know what this caffeine is going to then do to you, and blah blah blah. So it's the place of the professionals in that space cannot be overemphasized. And just to Shaban, it's important that the actual case is looked at by an expert and the resulting prescription thereafter. If you give everyone sleeping pills, for some it'll make things worse, for some it'll make things better. So it really, every situation is unique. That would be my comment.
I like that. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think that's really important as we wrap up. So, what an amazing conversation it has been. We may not have tackled everything, but hopefully we've given you some great nuggets that have been useful as we, endeavor to develop greater mental well-being. Remember, mental well-being is a state and it requires effort on our part. Let me get parting shots from my panelists. Parting shot from you, Alison, before I release you, and then Daniel, you can give us a parting shot. Melissa, I know you are backstage listening in. If you are able to share your parting shot in the chat, that will be great as well. Alison, what is your parting shot?
2 of them, Mucha. One that I really like by Glenn Close. What mental health needs is more sunlight, more candor, and more unashamed conversations. And my
Wow.
second one, your mental health is just as important as your physical health and deserves the same quality of the support that you give it.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I feel like I need those typed out. Alison, please just send those to me. I need to add them somewhere and type them out. That is amazing. More sunlight, more candor, more conversations. I agree 100% that we need to do more to talk about mental health. Alison, thank you so much for being with us today. It has been a delight to host you on this session. Thank you so much for the insights that you have shared. Before I release you both, Daniel, your parting shots as we wrap up our session.
Yeah. Hey, pressure. So my parting shot is pretty simple. Being able to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, it's cool. But it's more important that you can scale the mountains in your mind. Seek help. Seek help. Be good so that you can do good.
What? I'm telling you, you guys saved the best for last. What amazing parting shots. Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you so much, Daniel. We will continue the conversation online. You can keep sharing any questions if you feel your questions weren't answered, and we'll keep coming back and commenting in response to your comments. Allow me to release my panelists, Alison Wainaina, FSD Africa. Thank you so much for being here. Daniel Macau, NCBA Group, thank you so much for being here. It has been such an amazing conversation. I am blown away by the comments that were shared, and I think those parting shots shared by both of my panelists were just out of this world. We need to be or have more of these conversations. Our mental well-being is just as important as our physical well-being, and indeed we must pay just as much attention. If you haven't been participating in our 12-day mental well-being challenge, tomorrow is the last day. We will have a live in our FB, in our Facebook group. Do join us for that last wrap-up session. We're sharing a link to our website where you can register to the Facebook challenge that we've been doing. Tomorrow is day 12. And once you're in the group, you'll be able to access all the other days as well. So do connect with us on Facebook, in our Facebook group, as we continue to support you and help you to see how emotional intelligence supports your mental well-being. My key takeaways from today's session, wow, there have been so many. I think this idea, number one, Jacqueline said it for me, we must normalize therapy. I think that is my number one parting shot. The key takeaway I've had from this conversation is that it must be something that is normal. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay not to be okay. The idea is just as much as you will go and see a doctor for a persistent physical challenge you're facing. When you are struggling, ask for help. Number two, organizations must institutionalize support to their teams. Daniel shared, a 3-step framework. We must make sure in organizations that we are sensitizing our teams so that they are aware of the importance of looking after themselves as far as their mental health is concerned, and then provide the support that they need to bring themselves back into balance. And then I think the last thing I would say is that we must be responsible. I must take responsibility for me, for my mental well-being, and I must give it as much attention. We will not think twice about taking our cars for service, and yet we do not apply the same kind of approach to looking after ourselves. I like to refer to us as humans as billion-dollar assets. And so we must take care of this billion-dollar asset and make sure that you're looking after your mental health. Thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. We provided the learning. I hope you enjoyed your lunch as you were listening in. And indeed, let's continue this conversation. Remember the challenge that Daniel set. Reach out to at least one person this week and check in with them. Let's be responsible for ourselves and let's look out for our friends. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, join our Facebook group and participate in tomorrow's final mental well-being challenge and gain access to the earlier challenges if you haven't been with us. Goodbye and have a fabulous rest of the afternoon. Remember, be responsible. Take care of your mental well-being.